Rebecca Whitmore thought she had buried her past for good. But when a mysterious letter arrives, Daniel Whitmore's life is torn apart by the truth. His wife is hiding a dark identity. As secrets unravel, the once peaceful town of Cedar Ridge is thrust into a web of deception, and Daniel must decide whether to expose the woman he loves or protect her from a past that might just destroy them both. In the quaint, tree-lined town of Cedar Ridge, nestled between rolling hills and sleepy farmland, Daniel and Rebecca Whitmore lived what many would call an idyllic life. Their two-story white house with navy blue shutters and a wraparound porch looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. The lawn was always neatly trimmed, and colorful flowers bloomed in perfect rows along the walkway leading to their front door. On warm evenings, the couple could be seen sipping iced tea on their porch swing, smiling and waving to neighbors who passed by. From the outside, everything about their life seemed peaceful, structured, and full of love. Daniel Whitmore was a respected architect in the region. He had designed most of the town's newer public buildings, including the elementary school, the community library, and even the local park's grand gazebo. He was known for his calm demeanor, his work ethic, and his ability to bring warmth to even the coldest concrete structures. People trusted him, They often approached him with ideas for renovations or community projects, and he always listened with interest and offered thoughtful suggestions. Daniel had lived in Cedar Ridge since childhood. He had deep roots in the community and was the achy kind of man everyone simply liked. Rebecca, by contrast, was something of a mystery, though not in any obvious or suspicious way. She had arrived in Cedar Ridge 8 years earlier, and her relationship with Daniel bloomed quickly. They met at a local art fair, and within a year they were married. Rebecca was gentle, polite, and soft-spoken. She worked part-time at the town library, mostly organizing the children's section and helping with summer reading programs. She had a way with people, especially kids. Her calm voice and warm smile made her instantly likable. People described her as graceful and kind-hearted. She never made a scene, never drew too much attention, and never seemed out of place. Yet if someone had looked closer, they might have noticed the subtle gaps in her story. Rebecca rarely spoke about her past. She had no family in town, and she never mentioned childhood friends. When asked where she was from, she would vaguely reply, "Out west," and gently steer the conversation elsewhere. There were no high school yearbooks on the shelf, no old family photo albums, no framed pictures of parents or siblings. Neighbors assumed perhaps she was an only child or that she had lost her family. In a town like Cedar Ridge, where privacy was respected and gossip was usually reserved for petty topics, no one pressed her for answers. The Whitmores didn't have children, a choice Daniel once explained by saying they were simply enjoying life as it was. They were known for hosting tasteful dinner parties and attending every local fundraiser. Rebecca baked for school events and helped elderly neighbors with errands. She was the type of person you'd never expect to hide anything. She lived in quiet rhythm, often spending hours in her backyard garden tending to lilies, roses, and lavender. The garden was her sanctuary. Daniel had built her a small greenhouse one summer, and she filled it with potted plants and handwritten labels. She seemed happy. To those watching from afar, their marriage was solid, even enviable. Daniel clearly adored her. He would bring her coffee in the mornings and surprise her with flowers from the market. She returned his kindness with small gestures, packing his lunch with handwritten notes, keeping their home pristine, and leaving the porch light on when he worked late. They were the picture of a loving couple. Nothing ever seemed out of place. But Daniel had noticed small things, details that lingered in the back of his mind. There was the time a man approached them at a hardware store, seemed to recognize Rebecca, and then quickly walked away when she turned. She had laughed it off and said he must have mistaken her for someone else. Another time, he'd found her crying quietly in the bathroom with the door locked. When he knocked, she said she was just feeling overwhelmed. He believed her. Once, during a spring cleaning effort, he came across a locked box in the back of her closet. When he asked about it, she said it contained old journals and personal letters that she didn't like to revisit. He didn't press her. Daniel was not the kind of man to pry. He respected her space, and she never gave him a reason not to trust her. Still, her past remained a blank page in an otherwise full book. She never spoke about where she went to college, or what her childhood home looked like. She never talked about her parents. When they traveled to neighboring towns or through unfamiliar cities, she always kept her sunglasses on and avoided eye contact with strangers. Daniel attributed it to shyness, nothing more. Over time, the questions faded. Life moved along, predictable and calm. Daniel focused on his projects, Rebecca on her garden and her work at the library. They went to Sunday markets, celebrated anniversaries with weekend getaways, and watched old movies on rainy nights. On the surface, there was no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. Their home felt safe, their routines felt normal, and their relationship felt real. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, Daniel wondered why he knew so little about the woman lying next to him. Why there were no stories about high school crushes or family holidays. Why she never received calls from relatives or emails from childhood friends. He would brush the thoughts away, reminding himself that everyone had a right to leave their past behind if it hurt too much. He convinced himself that love was about the present, not the past. What he didn't know was that Rebecca had spent years building a wall around a secret so deep it had nearly become a second identity. Her kindness, her silence, her carefully chosen words, they were all part of something far more complex than Daniel could have imagined. While he designed buildings, she had constructed a life with no cracks, no gaps, no visible foundation. And as long as no one asked questions, that life stayed intact. But Cedar Ridge, for all its peace and quiet, could not keep the past buried forever. Something was coming, something small and ordinary, yet powerful enough to shatter everything they had built. And it would all begin with a simple envelope, delivered without warning, addressed only to Daniel. The morning started like any other. The sun filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the Whitmore kitchen as the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Daniel, dressed in his usual gray slacks and button-down shirt, sat at the counter reviewing architectural sketches for a community center renovation. Rebecca stood by the sink, humming a tune while rinsing blueberries for their breakfast. It was a peaceful routine they had repeated countless times. Quiet, familiar, comforting. After breakfast, Daniel stepped outside to collect the mail. The neighborhood was still, save for a distant barking dog and the faint rumble of a delivery truck turning onto another street. The mailbox was tucked beneath a rose bush at the edge of their front walk, a spot Rebecca had chosen for its aesthetic charm. Daniel opened it and reached inside, expecting the usual stack of bills, catalogs, and the occasional thank you card from a client. But today, among the ordinary envelopes, one caught his eye. It was stark white, with no stamps, no return address, and no postmark, just his full name handwritten in uneven, almost shaky letters. It wasn't like the neat flowing script of invitations or the blocky letters of official mail. It looked rushed, unsure. For a moment, Daniel stared at it, his Architect's mind analyzing every detail. It didn't make sense. Who would hand-deliver a letter and leave it in the mailbox? He glanced up and down the street. Nothing seemed out of place. He took the letter inside, setting the rest of the mail on the hallway table. Something about the envelope made him uneasy. He didn't want to alarm Rebecca, so he slipped it into his jacket pocket and went back to his sketches, pretending nothing was unusual. But the envelope burned in his thoughts, demanding his attention. Later that morning, when Rebecca headed to the backyard to water her garden, Daniel quietly opened it in his home office. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature, no explanation. Just 7 words printed in black ink. Your wife is not who she says. That was it. No context, no instructions, nothing more. Daniel stared at the page, confused. It felt like a cruel prank. But then he noticed something else. A folded piece of newspaper tucked behind the note. He unfolded it, his hands suddenly trembling. The article was old, yellowed at the edges, clearly printed years ago. The headline read, "Woman vanishes after husband found dead in home fire." The dateline marked the story from a small town in Nevada, Stonebrook, a place Daniel had never heard of. He scanned the first few paragraphs. A man named Travis Harrow had died in a house fire under suspicious circumstances. His wife, Lila Harrow, had gone missing the same night. Authorities, at the time, had been unable to determine whether she had been kidnapped, killed, or had fled. Then Daniel saw the photograph. It was grainy and faded, but the woman in it looked alarmingly familiar. The shape of her face, the slope of her eyebrows, the distant sadness in her eyes. It all pointed to the same impossible conclusion. She looked exactly like Rebecca. His mind reeled. He checked the article's date, almost 9 years ago. Before he had met Rebecca. Before she had come to Cedar Ridge. Before she became the woman he married. He read the article again, slower this time, looking for some mistake. Maybe it was just someone who resembled her. Maybe it was a coincidence. But as he stared at the image and then thought of his wife outside trimming rose bushes, a cold wave of doubt began to take over. Questions began forming rapidly. Had Rebecca ever mentioned living in Nevada? Had she ever spoken of a previous marriage? He couldn't recall her saying anything even close. In fact, he realized how little he truly knew about her past before she arrived in Cedar Ridge. The silence that once felt respectful now seemed suspicious. She had never talked about her 20s. She had no old friends visit, no family photos on display, no childhood stories she shared. Daniel looked again at the anonymous message. Who had sent this? Who knew enough to track them down, hand-deliver the envelope, and say nothing else? Was it someone connected to the case? A private investigator? A family member of the man in the article? The possibilities were too many. The lack of explanation made it worse. It was a warning, not a revelation. It offered no comfort, just confusion and fear. He didn't confront Rebecca immediately. Instead, he watched her closely over the next few days. He noticed the way she paused when certain questions came up, how she skillfully shifted conversations away from personal details. He even began searching their home when she wasn't around, through drawers, cabinets, and storage boxes, looking for anything that could give him answers. But there was nothing. Her records, her photos, her life in Cedar Ridge. It all began the year before they met. As if someone had created her from scratch. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to admit that the woman he had built a life with might have lied about everything. The way she laughed at his jokes, the way she tended to his injuries, the way she seemed genuinely happy in their life together, it all felt real. Could someone fake that for 8 years? Could someone live a lie so convincingly? One night, while Rebecca slept, Daniel sat in the living room staring at the newspaper clipping. He had scanned a copy and printed it for closer study. He examined the face in the photo side by side with a photo he had of Rebecca from their anniversary, dinner the previous year. The resemblance was undeniable. Even the necklace in the older photo, a delicate silver pendant, was the same one she still wore nearly every day. That discovery made his stomach turn. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was her, and that meant everything she had told him was potentially false. He knew he couldn't ignore it. But he also couldn't risk confronting her until he had more answers. The calm, quiet life they had built was suddenly sitting on a foundation of doubt, and one wrong move could bring it crashing down. He needed to know the truth, and he needed proof. Daniel decided to investigate, carefully, quietly, without alerting Rebecca. Whatever her reasons for hiding her past, someone else now knew about it too. The envelope had arrived without warning, and it wouldn't be the last. Somewhere in her silence, in her neatly trimmed garden, and in her carefully curated identity, lay the key to a past he had never been meant to uncover, and it had all started with one piece of mail. Daniel spent the next few days in a haze of silent suspicion. He went through the motions of daily life, pretending everything was normal, while his mind raced behind a carefully composed face. Every glance at Rebecca now carried a heavy weight. He looked at her differently, not with distrust exactly, but with a searching gaze, hoping for some crack in her composure, some unguarded moment that would explain everything. But there were none. She smiled as she always did. She hummed while folding laundry. She read her favorite books on the porch with the same peaceful expression. If she was hiding something, she hid it flawlessly. Unable to shake the image from the newspaper, Daniel began to search online archives for more information. He waited until Rebecca went to bed, then stayed up for hours on his laptop, scrolling through news articles, missing persons reports, and public records. He learned that Lila Harrow had grown up in a small Nevada town called Stonebrook. She had married young to Travis Harrow, a man 6 years her senior who worked as a mechanic. According to neighbors quoted in old articles, the marriage had always seemed strained. There were rumors of late-night arguments, unexplained bruises, and brief periods where Lila had disappeared for days, only to return as if nothing had happened. The fire that killed Travis Harrow occurred in the early hours of a January morning. Firefighters had arrived to find the house engulfed in flames. The blaze was determined to be suspicious. Accelerants were found at the base of the staircase. Travis's body was discovered in the living room. Lila was missing. Investigators initially suspected she may have died in the fire, but no trace of her was ever found in the debris. Her name went on the National Missing Persons list, and for a time, her photo appeared on news broadcasts and websites. Then the story faded. No family came forward. No sightings were confirmed. Eventually, people stopped looking. As Daniel dug deeper, his unease grew. He found a scanned copy of Lila's driver's license from a court record tied to a traffic ticket she'd received a year before the fire. The photo was clearer than the one from the newspaper. He stared at it for minutes at a time. The shape of her nose, the arch of her eyebrows, even the slight tilt of her head. It was Rebecca. There was no denying it anymore. He was married to a woman who had faked her identity and vanished after a suspicious death. But the more he uncovered, the more complicated the truth became. If Rebecca was Lila, and if she had fled her past, was she a murderer or a victim? The rumors of abuse, the mysterious nature of the fire, the complete disappearance. It all pointed to a woman desperate to escape. But escaping by faking a death, that required planning. It required nerves of steel. Could Rebecca, the gentle woman he knew, have been capable of such a calculated move? Daniel realized he needed professional help, not just to find out more about the case, but to understand what he was truly dealing with. He reached out to a private investigator he'd once worked with on a background check for a business client. The man, Tom Keller, was a retired detective with a sharp mind and a quiet approach. Daniel didn't reveal everything at first, just that he was trying to confirm the identity of someone he suspected had changed their name. Keller agreed to take on the case. While Keller began his investigation, Daniel continued his own careful search at home. He combed through old tax returns, utility bills, and Rebecca's employment documents. Everything was clean, too clean. Her records all began in the same year she arrived in Cedar Ridge. Before that, there was nothing. No social security number in use. No college transcripts, no medical records. It was as if she had materialized out of thin air. Every trail led back to a single starting point, the day she met Daniel. Then one evening, while Rebecca was out at a library committee meeting, Daniel decided to check the garage. It was mostly filled with gardening tools, paint cans, and seasonal decorations, but in the corner, behind an old armoire, he found a small metal filing cabinet. The drawers weren't locked. Inside were folders labeled with various years and topics, house repairs, receipts, warranties. It all seemed routine, until he found a file labeled personal. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside was a single manila envelope. It contained a set of documents he'd never seen before. A birth certificate for a woman named Lila Monroe, a marriage license between Lila Monroe and Travis Harrow, a high school diploma from a Nevada school. There were also 2 passports, one expired, bearing the name Lila Harrow, and the other current, issued under the name Rebecca Whitmore. Both photos were unmistakably her. Daniel closed the drawer and sat on the garage steps, the weight of the truth crashing over him like a wave. His wife had lived an entirely different life before him. She had erased that life and rebuilt a new, one from the ground up, and she had never said a word. The next day, Keller called with his findings. He had confirmed that Rebecca Whitmore did not exist in any official records prior to 9 years ago. He also found that the name had been used to obtain a legal identity through forged documents, including a driver's license and social security number. More alarmingly, he had tracked down the original detective from the Stonebrook fire case. The man had retired, but remembered the case vividly. He still believed Lila had survived and vanished to escape something terrible. But without evidence, there was never an arrest warrant, just a file gathering dust. Now, however, Keller warned, things had changed. The forged documents could be enough to bring attention back to the case, especially if someone else knew the truth. The letter Daniel received wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Someone out there had discovered Rebecca's real identity, and they weren't content to let her live in peace. Daniel knew he had reached a crossroads. The woman he loved had lied about everything. But if she had done it to survive, could he blame her? Was he willing to expose her to danger or justice after all these years? The facts were piling up, but the motives remained murky. He stared at the folder on his desk. The two names, the two faces, the two lives she had lived. Somewhere between the ashes of a burned house in Nevada and the blooming flowers in a cedar. Ridge Garden, a woman had buried a past that refused to stay hidden. And now, no matter what she said or did, the truth was rising to the surface. Daniel just didn't know yet what it would destroy first. His trust, his marriage, or the life they had so carefully built together. Daniel spent more and more time walking alone. The once familiar streets of Cedar Ridge now felt like a maze of uncertainty, every turn leading deeper into confusion. He avoided eye contact with neighbors, kept conversations short, and rarely answered his phone. His world had changed, not with an explosion, but with a whisper. A note slipped into his mailbox, 7 words that shattered the foundation of his marriage. Now, everything felt hollow. The cozy kitchen, the framed photos, the backyard garden, all of it carefully constructed on a lie. Inside the house, he found himself drifting through rooms, observing the life he had once taken pride in building. Rebecca's laughter no longer echoed with warmth. It lingered with questions. Her gentle touch now felt unfamiliar. Even the meals she cooked tasted different, not because she changed the recipes, but because he no longer trusted the hands that made them. Despite the growing distance between them, Rebecca remained the same on the surface. She still attended local events, baked for community drives, and kept the house spotless. But Daniel noticed subtle things now. How she watched people who approached too closely. How she always made sure to lock every door, even during the day. How she never received personal calls, never mentioned old friends or family. Her life, as he now saw it, was a fortress, quiet, carefully curated, and deeply guarded. Tom Keller, the private investigator, continued his research, feeding Daniel small but significant updates. One piece of information stood out. The house. Fire that killed Travis Harrow had been ruled undetermined, but not accidental. Traces of gasoline had been found along the floorboards, and the door to the bedroom, where Lila had supposedly been sleeping, had been found open. Fire investigators had always suspected someone had walked out alive, but they had never found her. Then, a new development surfaced. Keller discovered that a man named Calvin Mendez had recently contacted law enforcement in Nevada. Mendez had been a friend of Travis Harrow and claimed he had new information about the night of the fire. No one had taken him seriously at the time, but now, years later, he claimed to have seen Lila fleeing the scene the night Travis died. According to Keller, Mendez had described a woman with a bloodied arm and a suitcase running barefoot through the back alley behind the house. But Mendez had no evidence, just his word, and a photo he said he found recently among old belongings. Keller obtained a copy of that photo. It was blurry and dimly lit, but the woman's profile was visible, and even in poor resolution, Daniel recognized the posture, the shape of her shoulders, the side of her face. It was Rebecca, or rather, Lila, just moments after her life had apparently gone up in flames. The suitcase in her hand looked similar to the one they now kept in their attic. Daniel checked it the next day. Same model, same pattern. The lining inside was frayed at the same corner. It wasn't a coincidence. Daniel's thoughts became darker. What if Rebecca had killed Travis? What if the fire had been her doing? Not an escape from danger, but a cover for a crime. Could she have carried that secret all these years and built a new life with him as though nothing had happened? Then another letter arrived. This one wasn't left in the mailbox. It was slid under their front door late one night. Daniel found it the next morning, just before Rebecca came downstairs for breakfast. It was addressed to Lila. The contents were short but chilling. How long do you think you can hide? We know. You know what you did. Daniel quickly tucked it away and made sure Rebecca didn't see it. Someone wasn't just aware of her past. They were closing in. The notes weren't warnings anymore. They were threats. And whoever was sending them was nearby. Over the following days, Daniel started seeing unfamiliar faces in town. A man in a baseball cap loitering outside the local hardware store. A woman with dark sunglasses sitting in a parked car across from their house. He couldn't prove they were watching Rebecca, but his instincts screamed that something wasn't right. Even Keller was unsettled. "Someone's hunting ghosts," he said over the phone. "And they found one." Daniel faced a moral crisis deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. Should he turn Rebecca in? Should he confront her and demand the truth? Or should he protect her, no matter what secrets she carried? The love he once felt so confidently was now twisted with doubt. But even then, something inside him still wanted to believe that Rebecca, Lila, had a reason. That maybe she had done something terrible because she had no other choice. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and cast long shadows across the yard, Daniel watched Rebecca tend to her rose bushes. She knelt in the dirt, gently pruning, completely unaware of the storm swirling around her. He wondered if she ever thought it would catch up to her, if she had nightmares of fire, of screams, of fleeing barefoot through cold streets, or had she truly buried the past so deeply she no longer feared it. Then something happened that made everything worse. Keller called with urgent news. Calvin Mendez was dead. His body had been found in a motel room outside Stonebrook. Police ruled it a suicide, but Keller was skeptical. There was no note, no sign of depression, no history of instability. Just a man who, days after giving a statement about a missing woman, ended up dead. The photo of Rebecca had vanished. So had his phone. Someone had silenced him. The threat was real. Someone wasn't just trying to expose Rebecca. They were trying to erase anyone who knew the truth. Daniel's fear shifted into resolve. He could no longer sit back and wait. The life they had built was collapsing, and he was the only one who knew just how close danger was. Whether Rebecca had killed her husband or not, whether she had burned that house down or simply ran from a living nightmare, someone wanted her gone. That night, as they lay in bed, Daniel couldn't sleep. Rebecca curled beside him, breathing softly, her arm draped across his chest. He looked up at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. But he knew the peace wouldn't last. The lies were closing in, and the truth would demand a reckoning. Sooner or later, she would have to tell him everything. But what terrified him most was the possibility that even if she did, it might be too late to save either of them. It began with an unexpected knock. On a gray and silent morning, just as mist rolled through the trees and the town was still waking up, Daniel opened the front door to find two men in dark coats standing on the porch. They introduced themselves as investigators from the Nevada Bureau of Investigation. Their presence was calm, professional, and cold. They asked to speak with Rebecca. Daniel stalled, saying she was out on errands, though she wasn't. They didn't press, but handed him a card and said they'd return. As they walked away, Daniel felt the cold truth settle into his chest. The past was no longer creeping in from the shadows. It had arrived, wearing a badge and carrying questions. He closed the door slowly, every muscle tense. Rebecca was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, unaware of the quiet storm outside. Daniel stood there for a long time, watching her from behind. He didn't know what to do next. He had tried to protect her, tried to gather the facts, tried to make sense of a life built on secrets, but now it was beyond him. Others were involved. The clock had started ticking. Later that day, as Rebecca read on the couch with her tea cooling beside her, Daniel finally broke. He handed her the letters. All of them. The one from the mailbox. The one slid under the door. He watched her face as she read them. Her hands trembled. Her lips parted slightly but said nothing. She didn't ask who sent them. She didn't ask how long he had known. She simply looked up at him with eyes that carried the weight of everything she had buried, and then she disappeared. Daniel went to check on her the next morning, but her side of the bed was empty. The closet door was ajar. Several of her clothes were gone. The suitcase from the attic, the one she had likely carried that night she fled the fire, was missing. Her phone sat on the dresser, powered off. No note, no message, just the soft, haunting finality of an empty space. Panic didn't come immediately. It was replaced by something else, an icy, growing dread. She had vanished once before, and now she had done it again. This time without fire or police sirens. She had simply walked out of their life like a shadow fading at dusk. Daniel reported her missing. He went to the police station, sat in a small office under flickering fluorescent lights, and gave them everything he could. He didn't tell them the whole story, just enough to start a search. That she had been acting strange, that he believed she might be running from someone, that she had received threatening letters. He left out the name Lila Harrow. He left out the fire. Investigators began canvassing the area. Her car was found abandoned at a gas station several towns away. No fingerprints, no surveillance footage, just an empty shell like a trail cut short. No witnesses, no digital footprints. Rebecca had vanished as cleanly as she had appeared 9 years earlier. Daniel became obsessed with finding her. Days blurred together. He barely slept. He reread Keller's notes, made calls, reached out to forums, tracked sightings of missing persons that never panned out. For weeks, the house remained cold and silent, filled with ghost echoes of laughter and memories that now felt like dreams. Every creak in the floor made him turn his head. Every gust of wind at the window stirred hope, but she never returned. Then, weeks later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a small photograph and a single line written in slanted handwriting. The photo showed a distant figure standing on a beach at dusk, staring out over the water. It was blurry but unmistakable. It was Rebecca. The note read, "I never meant to hurt you, I had to go." Daniel stared at the photo for hours. He didn't know where the beach was. There were no signs, no landmarks, no clues. Just the ocean, the waves, and the figure who had once shared his life. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to feel betrayed. But all he felt was sadness, a deep, aching sorrow that came from loving someone you never fully knew. Keller later confirmed the envelope had been mailed from a coastal town in Oregon, but there was no name on the postal form, no fingerprints. Rebecca had done what she always did, slipped through without a trace, a ghost made of skin and secrets. The Nevada investigators returned one last time. They asked more questions. They showed him files, theories, fragments of timelines. Daniel listened but offered little. They didn't have enough to press charges. The case was decades old. Without Rebecca, there was no one to question, no one to arrest. Eventually they left, closing the file once again. Not solved, just suspended in time. Daniel tried to rebuild. He stayed in the house for a while, but it never felt the same. Every room whispered her name. Every item she left behind, books, clothes, jewelry, was a reminder of a person who may have never truly existed. Eventually, he sold the house and moved to a smaller place on the edge of town. He kept a few photos, the wedding ring, and the last envelope she had sent. He stored them in a wooden box, locked and hidden, not because he wanted to forget, but because he needed to survive. Years passed. Time dulled the sharp edges, but the questions never left. Had she killed her husband in Stonebrook? Had she been running from someone worse than him? Or had she simply been trying to live a life that the world had denied her? Daniel would never know. The truth, like Rebecca, had vanished into the wind. But every so often a letter arrived. No return address, just a short note. A pressed flower. A photo of a distant horizon. She never said where she was. She never asked for forgiveness. She never offered an explanation. But Daniel kept every one of them. Because sometimes in the quiet of night, it was enough to know she was still out there. Alive. Free. Still the same mystery he had fallen in love with. And somewhere, far from Cedar Ridge, a woman named Rebecca, or Lila, or whatever name she now wore, stood beneath a different sky, living a different life, always looking over her shoulder, always one step ahead of the past.